We are very glad to have you here today. I don't know if you know this, but the museum you're about to get a tour of is currently closed for renovations. So y'all are a very special tour group, as you're the only ones who are going to be getting a tour of this museum today in the whole world. My name's Seth Stevens. I work with Truth Seekers Fellowship. One of the reasons why we put on this event in partnership with Second Pres is because we want to see people come to know and come to glorify God. And we believe that art is a crucial part of bringing people to that. One of the reasons why is because art is such a wonderful way to convey a story. And we believe as Christians, we should all be master storytellers because we have the greatest story to tell. Without giving too much away, Jane is a docent at the Hungarian Museum of Fine Arts. Okay, I got it right this time. And she leads tours through this museum quite regularly, so she sees these pieces of art in person. If you come to Budapest very, very soon, she may give you a tour. Or no, it's closed. Never mind. This is the only place you can get the tour. And she uses this as a way to converse with people and engage people on the Bible, because she gets to pick her own tours. And so she usually chooses Bible pictures, and she gets to teach people about the Bible through art. And several of her lectures have been turned into courses that are now taught. So this is a very special guest speaker who is also a First Evan and Second Pres missionary in Budapest, Hungary. Please welcome my mom, Jane Stevens.
Thank you, Seth. It helps to have connections, doesn't it? Yes. All right, did everyone receive just a list, a printout of the paintings we're going to go through tonight? Seth has extra copies if you need them. And many of these names of the artists will be familiar to you, and others will be a surprise. I have been a part of the museum program in Budapest for 12 years now as a docent, and we all started out calling ourselves enthusiastic amateurs, and I am still an enthusiastic amateur. And everything I've learned there. The Lord has been very gracious to give me this format for teaching the Bible, mostly to unbelievers. So 11 of those years I've given lectures at the museum each year on biblical art, and then we walk through the museum and look at these paintings. I do want to say something about, this is the museum, how it looks from the outside. It's at Hero Square. It's beautifully located. We will continue the lectures this fall, even though the museum is closed, at the National Gallery, which is up on Castle Hill, but not many of our paintings will be available. So I will have to rely very heavily on PowerPoint this fall. And also my big prayer request is that as Ronnie and I transition out of Budapest, that God will provide someone to take over this class, that I can start training them this fall, I can give them all the materials, and they can carry on this. Really, it's a unique ministry, a unique opportunity, and I'm very thankful for it. So, I wanted to start with a couple quotes to throw out to you. Art is the interpretation of the great eternal realities of life. Art does not deal with things as they are in themselves. Science does that. But art, particularly religious art, deals exclusively with things as they affect the human soul. And surprisingly, it was the 20th century Russian artist Kandinsky who explained that the artist must train not only his eye, but also his soul. So, for centuries, Christian art has really served not only a devotional purpose, and it has also been a means of instruction. And it's meant to inform, to inspire, to recall the biblical narratives in a different way. And in the 6th century, it was Pope Gregory the Great who advocated that images were the books of the uneducated. So it's important to note, maybe, that under communism, when the curators had to make a decision between hanging a biblical painting or a secular painting, that at that time they usually chose the religious painting over the secular paintings. And the reason was that the churches were closed, but the museums were open. And now, sadly, I see that trend is reversing. So, let's see. All right, so I want you to look at the paintings and not at me. But this is just a version of the Bible. I teach in English. Everybody says, are you teaching this in Hungarian? No. Most of the people who come to the classes, English is their second language. We do have a lot more Hungarians now who come to the classes. And so I use the older version of the NIV. It's easy for them to understand. They read along. They read the scriptures with me. And some of these people have never opened a Bible in their lives. And I also give away Bibles, give away testimonies, books. For example, Rembrandt, the story of Christmas with all the illustrations. So just any means I can to give them the gospel. And I wanted to start out by way of introduction with the parable of hidden treasure. You are a very different audience than I would normally have. You know the Bible, and they usually know art. So I will spend more time tonight telling you a little bit about the art. And you know that this is one verse, just one verse in the Bible, and it is rarely depicted in art. So Matthew 13, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. And when a man found it, he hid it again. And then in his joy, he went and sold everything, all that he had, and he bought that field. The artist here is Gerard Dow. It's attributed to him, but it's also considered by many experts to be by Rembrandt himself. It was certainly done in Rembrandt's workshop, and he had at least 50 students who were listed. And anytime another artist has any hand in a painting now, then it cannot be attributed as a true Rembrandt. So, anyway, I want to show you some of the best. He was Rembrandt's first student in Leiden. He ended up with all of the props. You know, Rembrandt was famous for his props and costumes, and that's really what bankrupted him in the end. I was just in Amsterdam about 3 weeks ago and able finally to visit the Rembrandt house. And up in the attic, they have a studio, and they have shelves of all of his props, his books, shells, armor, all of the metal, everything that he used as props. And so those were left behind, and Gerard Dow ended up with all the props. So what's interesting to me about this painting is that the artist doesn't choose that moment of joy when the man finds the treasure and he's clicking up his heels. There's no smile on his face. It's a very contemplative painting. It's a frozen moment where the man is making the decision. He's made the discovery, and now what will he do about it? What can he do? What will it cost? And will it be worth it? The verse itself, really, we know, is talking about just how priceless and valuable the kingdom of heaven is, that it's worth everything in exchange. We can't buy our way into heaven, but it just shows the value. And so what I would like to do, let's see, so I wanted to show you a few of the props. Now Rembrandt was working a lot of times in monotones, kind of sepia tones, and so those golden browns and amber, he was an expert at that. Even just the way he makes the metal shine with using one or two colors is amazing. So I want to show you some of the hidden treasures in our museum that will be hidden away for 3 years now, sadly. We'll start going through the Old Testament. I'll give you highlights. This is not a very good picture. I'll show you another picture in just a moment. But it's called The Garden of Eden with the Fall of Man by Jan Bruegel. He was a very famous Flemish artist. He often corroborated with Rubens, and they did over 20 paintings together. So it's interesting to me, I'll show you another version of this, that it's called the Garden of Eden and the Fall of Man, but where is man? You can barely find him in these paintings. And it was often Rubens who painted the figures. Bruegel was called Paradise Bruegel because he painted so many of these animals and exotic birds, and it's almost encyclopedic. What he overwhelms you with all these creatures. It's kind of an excuse, really, to paint all of his favorite animals. So did you find Adam and Eve? Whoops. There, whoops. Let's try again. All right. There they are, way back there under the tree. So it's almost as though they're really not the theme of the painting. Just to give you a little bit of close-up, there's Adam and Eve in the background. Sometimes Rubens painted the horses as well. So I have kind of a sexy horse here. Some of the detail, you can see all these exotic birds. It's as though he's painting botanical pictures. And this one, we'll jump ahead a little in the narrative, is actually called Paradise, Animals Entering Noah's Ark. Same thing. Where's the ark? We definitely see the animals, but it took me a long time to find the ark. All right, did you find it? Right here. And here they are, like all the animals are paired together. And let's see, I'll give you an example. Bruegel would reuse these motifs, so the same little guinea pigs, the same turtles, the same lions, and wild turkeys were brand new. They'd been introduced from, the New World, so they were exotic. And porcupines, just minute detail. Give you an idea of some of the animals here included. Now we have a different version, a close-up of Adam and Eve. This is a young version of Adam and Eve. There is a version by Jacob Jordaens in the museum, and it was criticized because they said it looked like he had taken and painted farmhands, and they were really over middle-aged farmhands. And but there was one thing they had in common. There's a theme as we begin in Genesis that carries through the Bible, which you're familiar with it, and that is the fall, the first sin, and then the promise of a Redeemer. And in almost all of the paintings of Adam and Eve, there's not only the snake, let's see, here's the snake wrapped around the tree, but there's a ram, there's a lamb that's included, and that's pointing forward in the New Testament to the promise, to the Lamb of God, the sacrifice for sin. It's interesting, too, to me that Adam is pointing to himself as though he is taking responsibility for the action, for the decision, and yet he goes along with Eve's persuasiveness in this matter. So there are a lot of paintings that are from the Baroque era. Much of the biblical art was done during that period. The other works, Renaissance, other works, those would have been altarpieces, pieces that would show up in in churches. So, but the Baroque art, there's a lot of beautiful, huge works of art from the Baroque period, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. Now this is the reverse. This is a New Testament painting with a reference to the Old Testament. This is Gothic art at its best, Carlo Crivelli, and he has signed it very carefully at the bottom. Sorry, Seth. I've got to get used to this pointer. He signed it very carefully at the bottom. There's heavy, heavy beading and detail around, if you look at the drapery on Mary's cloak. Very, very minute detail, articulated. It's beautifully done. And yet, do you see what's in this image? The fruit. And this little Christ man is also taking the fruit. And that's a reference, of course, to Christ taking the curse for mankind. Most often it's an apple, because we're not told that it's an apple in the Bible, are we? It's because the word for apple is malum, and the word for evil is malus in Latin, and they were very close. So sometimes in Netherlandish art, Christ is holding an orange, but for the most part, it's an apple. And Adam and Eve, most of the time, we say took the apple. Let's zoom in on this a little bit. You can see this marvelous beading here in her crown. And why does Christ look like a little man? He would win the Ugly Baby Award. I'm so sorry. Partly because it was thought irreverent to use a live model as a model for Christ. So sometimes but also there's another reason. Christ was called a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. And so even in this baby picture, they have portrayed him as a man of sorrows. And the first murder, we have the first sin, we have the first murder. This is the Baroque period also, and this is a follower of Caravaggio, it's Italian artist. Adam and Eve mourning the death of their son, Abel, the righteous one. We get the feeling that this is mostly black and dark colors. This was all influenced by Caravaggio, who began this whole process of chiaroscuro, dark, light. So this huge contrast between dark and light was called chiaroscuro, and it was novel. You see it in a lot of Baroque art. We just feel the agony and the grief and the sorrow of Adam and Eve in this painting. And it's heightened by the fact that it is so dark. It's a dark moment. Abraham, the vision of Abraham. There are very few paintings of God the Father early in art. That was also considered a taboo. So God the Father was often represented with a hand or a triangle or maybe just an eye within a triangle. Here we have the feeling by the use of light. This is Dutch art, the golden age of art. So many of these artists were influenced also by Rembrandt and his use of light. He was kind of doing the same thing in his own way in Holland at the time. So we have the family here. This is Peter Potter, and I always want to think of Peter Potter picked a peck of peppers. I mean, Peter Piper, right. His son was also an artist, and his son, Paulus Potter, was the best known artist of animals, mostly cows. And of course, cows were very important in Dutch culture. It was one of their main livestock, their main way of living and producing. So Sarah, just a close-up to see And of course here we have all the rams. He's kneeling. This is found in the Austrian galleries. It's by an artist I really was not familiar with, Malberch. But his style is Rococo, maybe a little bit Mannerist. And he was painting sketches, oil sketches, for huge frescoes all over Austria and Hungary. Most of his works, the majority of his works, are found in Hungary. And this, I imagine, is also an oil sketch. To me, it's just amazing that artists would do, instead of drawing something, they would make an oil painting, a preparatory sketch, and offer it so that whoever is purchasing the painting, the patron, could decide if that was the composition he wanted, how much he would pay for it. And it's said that actually Malberch's sketches were sometimes better executed than the final frescoes that were up high on a ceiling or along the walls. I think this is one of the most powerful paintings in our museum. And it's because of the color, the red, and the way the light falls on the body of Isaac. You can barely make out some of the details, but the light is, as often was the case, whoops, sorry, just gotta get used to this clicker. That's a close-up. So our light is coming from this side. We have a strong diagonal here, but the way the light falls on Isaac's body it's very dramatic. The red gives us that pathos, the passion, the emotion. And you can see the light spilling out even onto the bucket, which would have held the fire. Remember, he said, Father, here's the fire, here's the wood, where's the sacrifice? And this is the question that's asked all through the Old Testament. Where is the lamb? Where is the lamb? And I know from Ronnie that the answer is in the New Testament. When John the Baptist says, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Joseph, major player in the Old Testament. He's a type of Christ in many ways. He was the favored son. He was a prophet. He was falsely accused. He was wrongly punished. He was rescued from the pit of death, betrayed for the price of a slave, forgotten by his brethren, later raised up to a place of honor and power, thus rescuing his people. So, again, we have a Baroque painting, and we have a picture within a picture, which is often done. Here the device is a window where someone's looking in upon the scene. And this was used, another popular theme or concept was to portray the three stages of man, or the three ages of man or of a woman. So Joseph, I thought originally that this was Joseph explaining the dream, but this is Joseph in the center. And this artist was very interested in anatomy and also the psychology. So you get a good idea of that in this painting. We see this muscular, twisted body, all the muscles, the wrinkles, everything. So he's listening to the cupbearer explain his dream. He will have the good news. And here is the baker with his hand to his head, and he has received the bad news. Joseph, let's see if I've done a close-up. No, I haven't. So again, we have a dark scene because it's within a prison. This is what the Baroque artists were doing, nocturnal scenes, the dark contrasting with the light, and it makes a good contrast. You know, jewelers, when they want to display a very expensive piece of jewelry, a pearl or something gold, they'll put it on a black piece of velvet to set it off. And that's what these artists were doing. Moses striking water from the rock. This is not signed, but we are pretty sure it's by Antonio Bellis. And the criticism of this painting is that there's really there's really no emotion here. I mean, these people were starving, they were dying of thirst, and there's nothing there that really gives us that feeling. There's an absence of anguish. There's no expression of anger. There's no fear. But Tintoretto, and I don't have his painting, did just the opposite. You realized that it was also supposed to represent their spiritual thirst, not just their thirst for water itself. An artist's device here would be this woman looking out at you. She draws you into the painting. She's your key to the painting. And then there's probably a hidden self-portrait, not a self-portrait, but either a self-portrait or a portrait of the person who commissioned this painting. That happens a lot in art too before it became popular. Gradually, you see more and more patrons they start taking over the paintings. But originally they were smaller images. Okay, some of you have found what doesn't fit. The face that doesn't fit would be this man right here. And then here is our woman drawing us in. Also, what's happening in Baroque art particularly is that there's a move. Just like in fashion, you have swings in art. So it's a reaction to one thing, so a reaction to Renaissance art, which is very staid, symmetrical, idealized, airbrushed. Then all of a sudden we get into naturalism, we get into realism, we get into lots of dirty feet, and also in Baroque, a lot of drapery, unnecessary drapery and fabric that wouldn't be used naturally. So we'll see that later too. One of my favorites in the Baroque gallery, this is Italian by Guido Reni. And he was also reacting. He started out painting in the style of Caravaggio, and then he decided he was going to revert and do classical painting, more idealized. The colors here are really true colors, beautiful colors. It's a beautiful painting. It's kind of, some of these paintings are hard to look at. They're not enjoyable or pleasant, but this is a beautiful painting. The moment when Abigail accepts the marriage offer from David after really protecting him from shedding innocent blood. So it even includes a classical pillar that divides the painting. So there's David on the left, and his mighty men. The young man is probably his armor bearer. And this painting is also found in the Chrysler Museum in Newport News. The exact copy is there, just near my mom's house, so I've seen it. One of the best parts of this painting, I think, is a donkey. One day I want to we have some great donkeys in our museum, and one day I just want to do a PowerPoint on all the donkeys. So she has everything here, even the garland in her hair. A blue Italian landscape. Another genre. Did you know that there is a whole genre of art dedicated to the book of Ecclesiastes? If you've always loved Dutch still lifes, the beautiful fruit arrangements, they're called a banquet arrangement or a pronk arrangement, but also the floral arrangements, the beautiful Dutch floral paintings. Did you know they have a religious meaning? They all have a moral tale behind them. And there are about 8 different types of still lifes, and that is the next lecture I would like to do in Budapest. So I will only tell you about 2 types right now. This is a vanitas, and it comes from the first chapter of Ecclesiastes. Vanity, vanity, all is vanity, and it means emptiness. The whole book is showing you about the futility of all these earthly things that we desire. Wealth, position, maybe even our good health, achievement, honors, all these things, they're not going to last. They're transient. So the whole book is talking about the transience of life, and that's what these paintings are portraying. This particular style is called memento mori, which means a reminder of death. And surprisingly, these were, even though they were considered a lesser form of art, not the highest form of art, they were very popular and they sold well on the market. All of the still lifes. I don't know why these particularly would be that popular. They almost always included the skull. That's a pretty good reminder of death. The coins, here's a medallion which represents love, you know, even love is fleeting. And the pouch could either represent, that could be a tobacco pouch or it could be a money pouch. And then there is no question what this painting is all about because the artist has even written what it is. It just says Vanitas Vanitum in Latin. And then within the book, it also states, this is in Dutch, the transience of worldly things. No doubt about it. And this is one of my favorite artists because he has the name Collier. And he signed it and dated it. So this is from about 1675. And there are so many verses that relate to this whole genre. A lot of times, I'll show you this next painting. Here's a close-up. And a lot of times, this is another style. I'm not going to go into detail on this, but notice how there's another skull. There's the broken shaft of wheat. Some of the key elements are an hourglass with time running out. Think of Ecclesiastes 9:12. Moreover, no man knows when his hour will come. And then Ecclesiastes 12 includes many of these elements. Remember him, remember your Creator, before the silver cord is broken, which represents the loss of life support, or the golden bowl is broken, that signifies the crash of death, before the pitcher is shattered at the spring, and that reminds us that fragile life can be lost. So just an introduction. Oh, and one other thing. Almost always there are musical instruments because music is something, you can't hold on to it. It's here and then it's gone. But almost always the instrument will be broken. So here it's broken. It's in two pieces. It's a close-up. So you got the silver cord and the tobacco. Tobacco is often an element because tobacco smoke is fleeting. Sometimes bubbles are included. They don't last very long either, do they? And one of the best artists at doing these fruit still life was Jan Davids de Heem. He was really one of the best. And they included exotic fruit. It shows you how wealthy the Netherlands was at this time. The artist also shows off by giving you this peel of the orange. The edge of the plate, he's showing off. The oysters represent sensuality, by the way. Okay, and then one thing that's almost always included in this type of still life comes from the Dutch word stilleven, which means motionless. There's another explanation of that. But the other element, let's see if I can find it. Almost always you will find a loaf of bread and you will find grapes and possibly the leaves from the grapevine. And that is reminding you of the Lord's Supper and the Last Communion. You look and see if you don't find them in just about every still life that's a fruit or table setting. It's beautiful. I always loved these. I was always attracted to these, but I never knew they had another real meaning. And see, the Dutch would have known that. They knew how to read a painting. We know how to read a book. And they knew what everything in the painting would mean. And A pumpkin represented the church because of all the seeds in it. The butterfly represented the soul. Lizard represented resurrection. All these elements, the empty shell represented the emptiness of life. So anyway, it's a wonderful study. It's a fascinating study, all in and of itself. This artist was also probably, Art de Gelder was probably one of Rembrandt's most faithful students and pupil, and he did many versions of Esther. This is considered one of his best, and I had wondered, these are Rembrandt colors when you look at them. I painted a room and I call it Rembrandt tan, and it's about this color. Anyway, I love it. There are thick brush strokes here, and that's impasto, and think of pasta, think of paste. And that was his later style. He started out with a smooth style, Rembrandt did, and you don't see the light source here. You rarely see a light source in Rembrandt's work or his pupil's work, but you know it's there. Now, this is another painting that originally I thought was about something else. I thought this was the beginning of the story. I thought this was Mordecai pleading his case before Esther. But that would mean that the artist had taken artistic license, because Mordecai didn't come into Queen Esther. He covered himself in sackcloth and ashes, and he sent the message to her. He didn't come in at that time. So I'm thinking now, after all these years looking at the painting, that it's the end of the story. It's chapter 9. It's where Mordecai originally writes all the letters and sends them to all the provinces. And then in verse 29 it says, Then Queen Esther and Mordecai gave full written authority, confirming this second letter about the Feast of Purim and how it was to be celebrated for every generation, so that they would remember that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation. It's how God rescued his people. And that Feast of Purim is still celebrated. It's a 2-day feast. It's still celebrated by your Jewish friends even now. So what do you think? Is this Paul Harvey's The Rest of the Story? Now let's move into the New Testament. And this is maybe not the best painting we have of the Annunciation, but I wanted to include something else that had the influence of Rubens. And Segers was also a Flemish Baroque artist. He was heavily influenced by Rubens. When you think of Rubens, what do you think of first? His roly-poly female nudes. Okay, that doesn't work with an Annunciation or with a biblical painting, does it? But this artist did give us some real pudgy cherubs. We'll come to those in a minute. And that is also characteristic of Baroque art. In Renaissance art, the angels were thin, some of them were even feminine, they were tall, they were elegant, but that changed in Baroque art. They became these chubby cherubs. And I don't think that's the way the Bible portrays them either. Anyway, this Annunciation was done probably in the early 1600s. There's a strong diagonal. Notice how we have the shaft of light. It goes right through the dove of the Holy Spirit. So it represents, and then Mary has a fiery halo, which represents the work of the Holy Spirit in her life at conception. And the angel here is, this angel, Gabriel, is a very masculine angel. And we get his feet. We're getting some very natural, we're getting some realism in here. Even his toes are kind of curled. he has the scepter to the church. This represents a church scepter. The doorkeepers at the churches during that time had a scepter. But the diagonal represents, we just imagine that God is above and that this is a divine moment. Then the cherubs, let's see, we can do this. Okay, so here are our little putti, and they even kind of have faces like old men too, a little mischievous. The detail here, so here's the church scepter that he has, and Mary is often portrayed in an interior setting, maybe a church, and of course she's reading the scriptures, and we know Mary was a peasant girl. She probably did not read the scriptures, but she was well versed in the scripture. She quoted over 15 references to the scriptures in the Magnificat. So this is more of an aristocratic rendering of Mary, not the way she was realistically. And then just to zoom in, every figure in art, in Christian art, has an attribute. That means they have some kind of a symbol. So Mary Magdalene, of course, has her spice jar. John the Baptist has tons of attributes. He has the lamb, he has a narrow cross with a banner, he has his leather camel hair outfit even when he's a baby. He has a bowl for baptism. At the Annunciation, Gabriel always has a lily, so you can identify him that way. This also reflects the wealth of the Netherlands. You often see the tapestry, beautiful, expensive tapestry in these paintings that come from the Netherlands or from Holland. Another Flemish, Netherlandish artist, and I've talked about this painting, some of you may remember. It's unusual because it breaks a lot of the rules. In Italy, there were rules for the way you painted Mary, even the colors that she always wore blue and white before the birth of Christ, and then blue and red after, or pink after the birth of Christ. So, and usually in Italian art, Jesus was given and Mary were painted with blue because that was the most expensive color, lapis lazuli. I'm not saying it right. But this artist has used earth tones. It's the adoration of the shepherds, and we know they were the first there, the first visitors, and that was quite appropriate, that the first visitors to the Lamb of God, the Son of God, were shepherds, and they knew all about lambs and sheep. And here the perspective is reversed. We're not on the outside looking in, we're on the inside looking down upon the Christ child. And so we could be one of the animals. We could be that mule or the cow, or it could be from the perspective of God the Father himself that we're looking upon this scene. God with us, Emmanuel. Lots of things in this painting I love. And even Jesus is turned on his head. We don't usually see him from this perspective, do we? So this is the outside of the cave, and all these shepherds leaning in different poses of worship. I'm going to run out of time here. One holding his younger brother up so he can look in right here. I can just see two brothers, another praying, one pointing, and another, my favorite, is looking at his toes, inspecting baby. Isn't that what you want to do with a little baby? You want to see their fingers and their toes and wrap your finger around them. So there it is, a little close up. And they're earth tones too. I mean, because the shepherds were men of the earth, so they were greens, they were browns, they were amber and orange. And usually the depiction of the adoration of the shepherds is the emphasis is on the humanity of Christ, the human side of Christ. And now we have the adoration of the magi, or the kings, or the wise men, And the emphasis there is on the deity of Christ. So here are these earthly kings coming to worship the King of Kings. We're told that one day every knee will bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord and Savior of all. This is a Spanish painting, and the gifts, and so here we have kind of a zigzag, and your eye goes across and down. We end up once again with this device of a young boy looking out at you, drawing you into the scene. What is your opinion of what's going on here? This is probably the artist's son, we're told. So, his claim to fame. And the shaft of heavenly light, which represents, of course, the star of Bethlehem. And the only face here that looks maybe like, this artist was a pupil of El Greco's, and this face maybe looks like something El Greco would have painted. But El Greco never had any followers that continued in his style. We'll talk about him in just a minute. The gifts that the Magi brought, you know about those. The gold was symbolic of his deity. It was symbolic of heaven, the gold of heaven. The incense represented his purity, or the praise going up to heaven. The myrrh represented his death, and it was used for embalming. Okay, let's move along here. Just a close-up so you can see some of the details. And legend tells us not that there were 3 Magi, but that there were 3 gifts. And legend has it that one of the Magi was a black man. So that's very often seen in art. And here's the artist's son holding one of the crowns. This is also an oil painting sketch for a much larger piece, which is painted. It's a fresco in Vienna at the Karls Church. I've seen the finished product. This particular piece is about this actual size. And again, it is sketchy because it's a preparatory sketch. This style is also Rococo, and you see these twisted bodies, artificial. It's artificial. It's not exactly the way anyone would stand. The atrophied limbs, all of these. You see, this was designed for a church where they talked about the healing of Christ. So very appropriate. Very famous artist, Lucas Cranach, the elder. Did you know that he was a good friend and follower of Luther? And, Durer, I'm thinking of another fellow. And, he was a follower and friend of Luther, but also a contemporary of Durer, This is a symmetrical composition in that Christ is in the center, and then there are 5 figures on the left, and then 5 on the right. This was a theme that was very popular because it talked about forgiveness of Christ. The parable of the prodigal was also a very popular subject in this period because it talked about forgiveness. And the writing here, you can't quite see it, but in German, it is an exact quotation of John 8:7. If any one of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw the stone. So we have probably the angry husband here on the left, and a true ugly mug. He really is an ugly mug. There's a lot of detail here. But what is also very interesting is the play of hands, and we'll see that in another painting by Strozzi. Hands are very difficult, and in portraits, the portrait artist was usually paid more if he included hands in the painting. So that's why a lot of portraits, Renaissance portraits and so forth, are bust up. They don't have hands are hard. Ask any artist. But here you see, first, in contrast, you see the husband's hands clenched in anger, ready to attack, and then Christ's hand of blessing. This is often the way his hand is shown as a sign of blessing. The resurrected Christ. It's the right hand of Christ that is the blessing Christ, and his hand on her hand, showing his forgiveness and acceptance of her. Another favorite, Annabelle Carracci, he founded a school of Bolognese art. He also was reacting. And so he was abandoning Caravaggio's style. This is a very smooth style, entirely classical. And it's a return to the high Renaissance of art. And of course, it's the woman at the well. And so many things here. This is the moment when Christ reveals himself to her. I am he. You know, she's talking about, oh, they worship you this way over here, and we worship you here on this mountain. And her question to her people in her village was, could this be the Christ? And the answer, of course, is yes. And he says, I am he. One of the great I ams of Christ. There's motion here. She's leaving her water pot behind. She's leaving Christ. The disciples are returning with the bag of bread. You can barely make it out. And then a touch of whimsy, probably the youngest. I'm guessing this is John, because he was the youngest, peeking through the branches of the tree. And then because he is reverting to this classical style, he includes classical ruins in the background. Close up. I mean, this is a beautiful painting and a beautiful, marvelous story in the Bible.
They're dressed more like you would think they would actually dress in that day as opposed to the ones that are dressed like.
Right. Oftentimes artists would even portray the biblical characters, like in Dutch painting, in the contemporary clothing of their day. And I thought, well, didn't they know, that Jesus wore robes? But it was so that the people could relate to the Bible stories themselves, put themselves in the picture, if you will. Now, this is not our stereotype of Christ at all. Most full-figured painting of Christ we have, again, it's Baroque period. Notice all the excessive drapery here, all the fabrics. Can you imagine Christ with this kind of a garment on? It even has buttons. It has buttons, and yeah, he's very stylish. So Baroque is filled with theater. It's almost as though they put the characters on stage. They have set the stage for us, and they've even given us a curtain for a backdrop. This would have taken place in the synagogue. It's the tribute money, and again, the artist is showing off to show us the coin on its side. He doesn't show us the front of the coin. That would be too easy to paint. He shows us his skill by showing the coin on edge. Here's the pocket of money. Here's our person drawing us into the painting and into the story. And you know the story. They're trying to trap Jesus. And doesn't he always turn the tables on them? He asks them questions that they can't answer. So now there is a tiny halo here, but that's our only indication that this is a saint, a holy person. What I wanted you to see was the marvelous play of hands in this painting. This is what Strozzi was best known for. And just, we can start here, and we see this hand, and then it goes down to Christ leaning on this podium. And anyway, just a lot of skill here. And then back to the coin, and then back to this. So this is an expert. And there's a lot of drama here, and there's a lot of color and impasto that adds to his style. This is his mature style in art. Okay, the little boy in his hands. He's dressed like a page boy. All right, we have a couple more paintings to go. Now, most of you, if I should have covered the name on this and asked who recognized this artist, because he's so recognizable. So once you know his art, you always recognize it. It's so unique. He was about 400 years ahead of his time, because even now, to our eyes, his work looks modern. And he was El Greco. And it's in our Spanish gallery. He was born in Crete. He spent time in Italy. He really trained in the Byzantine style of art, and that's evident in a lot of his faces and his work. But you know what? They could not pronounce his name in Italy. And can anyone tell me his name? Yeah, Domenicus Theotokopoulos. I can't say it either. So we call him El Greco. But he spent about 30 years in Spain, but he always was proud of his Greek heritage and signed his name accordingly. This was done in about 1605. It's the Agony in the Garden. Again, you know the story. And what he's doing here is remarkable. He's punching holes in the darkness. We have 7 sources of light in this painting. And it's just thrashing and crashing around the whole picture and overflowing. So there's the heavenly light from this cloud, there's the illumination of the angel, there's the light that crashes and reflects off the rock. Here's the moonlight peeking through, the torches of the arresting party, and some of this light is even falling over and reflecting on the sleeping disciples. This is maybe the most interesting light source. None of it's direct light. And that is supposed to be Jerusalem, right? But the artist used his adopted hometown, and that is really the cityscape of Toledo, Spain. So, anyway, you can see a little better here. His colors were unique too. They're almost fluorescent colors. If you walk through the Spanish galleries, nobody is using these colors except El Greco. We have a copy of this painting in the museum, The Taking of Christ. It is by Caravaggio. We don't have an original. We have a copy. The interesting thing about paintings, I was very confused, but they would say, this is an original copy. What does that mean? Okay, it means that Caravaggio copied his own work. So it's an original Caravaggio, but it's his copy of the first work. Very confusing. What we have in our museum is a copy by a follower of Caravaggio, not Caravaggio himself. And there is a wonderful story about this painting that is now in Ireland. It was discovered in 1990. It had been hanging, it had been lost for 200 years. It had been hanging in a Jesuit residence, maybe you know of this, in Dublin. They thought it was by Honthorst, who was a follower of Caravaggio, and they thought it was a copy of the lost original. But when they finally had it cleaned, and this residence is only a few doors down from the National Gallery in Ireland, they discovered that it was the original all along. And they don't know if it was attributed to Honthorst intentionally, by that, whether it was a mistake, or whether someone wrote it in an inventory as by Honthorst, so they wouldn't have to pay the import and customs on it. Anyway, there's a book out called The Lost Painting. It's a story, I mean, it's just, you know, a novel about it, but it's a fun read. Anyway, here we have John. And again, look at the use of light. Look at the light reflecting off the metal. This is light coming out of darkness, what Caravaggio did best. And we don't, this is John. He's the one who's almost saying no, trying to hold back the events of that evening. The Kiss of Betrayal, the best part of this painting is probably the armor? How do you paint black?
That red thing.
It's just a cloth, and again, I think it's part of the chaos of the whole scene. And like I said, there's always too much fabric in a Baroque painting, so it's just thrown in there. Maybe it's kind of a backdrop for what's going on. And Caravaggio was kind of the bad boy of art. Here he is. This is a self-portrait, what we think Caravaggio looked like. And he was always getting in trouble and fleeing the authorities. So. Veronese, this is Italian, and he was actually named for the city, that he was from, Veronese, but they say he was more Venetian than Titian. So his style was high Renaissance. He uses light as part of the character. Light is actually a character in this painting. So this halo around Christ is called a mandorla or an aureole. How do you say that? It's quite dramatic. It is high Renaissance, so it's a triangular composition. The pyramid or triangular composition is something that Raphael and Michelangelo were developing. They were trying to get away from the perfect symmetry or everything lined up like a frieze on the wall. And how do you find perfect harmony within a painting where you have more than, where you have even 3 figures and it's not perfectly symmetrical? And they came up with the pyramid composition. So the darkness is part of the scriptural text. We know that the daytime turned to darkness and turned to night at the time of Christ's death. And he was also influenced by an artist named Tintoretto. You may know Tintoretto and his use of life. Tintoretto was doing a lot of almost mysticism. He was interested in reviving medieval mysticism. Mary is, there's also a cityscape of Jerusalem here in the background, which you can see more in detail. This is maybe more authentic. You can almost see, is this the Eastern Gate at the bottom? I'm going to skip this tonight. We'll talk about that another time. Keep your curiosity up. Also in our Spanish galleries, Alonso Cano, another bad boy in art. He was born and died in Granada, but he had to flee the city many times. Once because he was accused of murdering his wife. And yet, despite this tempestuous personality, he seemed to produce these beautifully calm and serene paintings. So you recognize this. This is spelled lots of different ways, but it's the point in the scripture where Christ says, "Do not touch me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father." So she mistakes him as the gardener, and here we have the shovel, and she's about to touch him. The wounds are displayed. The fabric is beautifully, beautifully portrayed here. We know it's Mary Magdalene. Cano was also called the Spanish Michelangelo because he was so diverse in his talents. He was a sculptor, he was a painter, he was an architect, he was a draftsman, and just multi-talented. And then, close up. This is an early painting. It's by a Portuguese artist. It's in the Italian galleries because he spent time in Italy. And it is titled The Resurrected Christ. But often this prototype is called the Blessing Christ. So you see here the hand of blessing that is usually shown, Christ blessing with the right hand. There's an interesting Maltese cross here in the corner. This is on a wooden panel, and so this detail around the halo, it's all hammered in. The cross is hammered in. And you can see the Byzantine influence here, where it's a staid face portrait looking straight ahead. The eyes are fixed, looking out, and yet because I think it's because some of the paint has worn away that we have the blush cheeks. And there's something about this. There's a warmth. It's engaging of Christ, the resurrected Christ. And the banner, you know, often in pictures after the resurrection, Christ is shown with a Christian banner or a flag. And it's almost always white with a red cross. It represents his resurrection, his victory over death and over sin. And if you think about it, traditionally in history, a large banner is used to regroup the troops. And the cross itself is a rallying point, but it's not the end of the story. There's several verses about a banner. Isaiah 11, the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples, and the nations will rally to him. In Exodus 17, Moses built an altar, and he called it, "The Lord is my banner," Yahweh Nisi, to celebrate his victory. And then in Song of Songs, his banner over me is love. So I like this representation of the resurrected Christ. And then if you do come to Budapest, you will have to go and visit. Some of you have just been there. The St. Stephen's Basilica, that was started in 1851. It was finished in 1905. There was a problem because the original dome collapsed, and so it had to be rebuilt. It was started in the neoclassical style, using a Greek floor plan. It's named after the first Christian king of Hungary, István, or Stephen. But if you were to go there and look very carefully, there for all to see over the entrance, over the arch, are the words you can't see very well in my picture because I couldn't find a good picture of it. If you know your Latin, unfortunately I translated it down here for you. Ego sum via veritas e vita. I am the way, the truth, and the life. So I will end with that, and just please do pray. Thank you for your attention. And please do pray that I can find someone to continue doing this ministry and that I can continue doing this wherever the Lord takes us next. It may be Moscow, Russia, which is a very cultured place, and art is a good medium there. And also Nice in France, also a place where art is very much of interest, a very secular place where art is important and could translate well to non-believers. So thank you very much for your time and your attention.